So first of all, we've got new measures in there. So this time we've got reduced age of finishing, which is a big measure for us. Counts for about 15% of the total abatements from agriculture. We've got a range of feed additives in there. So this is to reduce methane. We have slurry aeration in there that we didn't have the last time. We also have the impact of diversification options.
Hello, I'm Cathal Summers.
And I'm Deirdre Glenn.
You're Teagasc Sustainability Advisors, and you're welcome to the Teagasc Environment Edge podcast number 61, bringing you the latest information, science and opinion to improve farm sustainability. With our agricultural emissions reduction target set for 2030, can the sector achieve this in time, and what direction can we take to succeed?
Teagasc researcher Professor Gary Lanigan joins us to discuss the latest update of the third edition of the Marginal Abatement Cost Curve. Gary, you're very welcome to the show.
Thanks, Deirdre.
For the uninitiated, can you describe what the MACC is?
Okay, so a MACC, or a Marginal Abatement Cost Curve, is essentially an analysis that sets out in quite a visual way sets of mitigation options and their costs. And essentially, it's a glorified cost-benefit analysis, and it ranks mitigation options from the least expensive to the most expensive. And graphically then it's easy to see A, how much mitigation each option will deliver, and B, how much it'll cost. We did the last MACC in 2018. This is our third MACC. And since then, of course, we've had new science and of course, policy has drastically changed with the Climate Action and Low Carbon Development Act. And similar to the previous MACC, we have three marginal abatement cost curves, one for agriculture, one for land use change, and one for bioenergy. So when you look at a MACC graph, the width of the bar, you see two things: the width of the bars change and the height of the bars change. So the width of the bar indicates how much mitigation is done, and the height of the bar indicates how much it costs. So the higher the bar, the more costly it is. The wider the bar, the more mitigation is done. And if the bar is below the x-axis into the minus territory, then it's happy days. It's a cost negative option, i.e. it saves the farmer or a stakeholder money.
Lovely. And the term marginal it kind of confuses me a little bit. What does the marginal mean?
So these are marginal costs. So it means it's the total cost of the measure minus the total savings the measure might make for you. So a perfect example would be lime, for example. So there is a cost associated with lime. There's a cost associated with spreading the lime, but then the lime saves you nitrogen fertilizer. So for every pH unit that your soil goes up, so if you go from pH 5.5 to 6.5, you're saving about 70 kilos of nitrogen per hectare, and you're also saving, about 10 to 20 kilos of phosphorus per hectare. So you've got a phosphorus saving, you've got a nitrogen saving, and so you have to cost those savings in because there's less bagged nitrogen, less phosphorus that you need.
And Gary, you mentioned this is the third MACC, so I know you've been involved from the get-go, so I hope you're not insulted if I call you the godfather of MACC now at this stage, but so I'm presuming there has been a number of changes and the first one, and I think, did you say the newest one is a 400-page document or something, so there's obviously a lot of stuff in it?
Yeah, 353 pages to be precise. So it's expanded quite considerably, so there's a lot of changes. So first of all, we've got new measures in there. So this time we've got reduced age of finishing, which is a big measure for us. Counts for about 15% of the total abatements from agriculture. We've got a range of feed additives in there. So this is to reduce methane. We have slurry aeration in there that we didn't have the last time. We also have the impact of diversification options, such as the impact of biomethane or organics or forestry on stocking rates. And if we get a biomethane industry, then there's the use of digestate that follows on from that. Then in terms of land use change, we've got a range of forestry options, such as extending the age of rotation, agroforestry, and some other measure, hedgerows, etc. in there. So there's been a lot of science done in the last 5 years, so they all have to be incorporated in. On top of that, what we've done this time is we've looked at two rates of ambition, if you will. So we've got two adoption rates. So pathway 1, which is a high adoption rate, and pathway 2, which is a very high adoption rate. And we also have different speeds of uptake for the different measures. So some of the measures, such as low emission slurry spreading, we front load to earlier on during the commitment period because it's a multi-year. It's a multi-year target. It's already started from 2021 all the way up to 2030. And then some other measures, such as feed additives, we backload. So we have them coming on stream and very strongly towards the end of the decade. And then some other measures that are well known, such as fertilizer formulation, etc., we have a linear adoption of those. So depending on the measure, we've got different rates of uptake. So again, that's different.
Yeah, you've mentioned feed additives there as well. And I only bring this up because, and I know you've said there is no silver bullet in the MACC, but a lot of farmers are looking at feed additives as a silver bullet. Is that correct, or how far advanced are we at this stage?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say they're a silver bullet yet. Where we are at the moment is that colleagues in Moore Park and in Grange have been trialing 3-NOP, which is the main inhibitor of choice. Its commercial name is Bovaer, and it's being produced by DSM. And that is very, very close to market now. Will probably be on market next year for dairy cows, and fairly soon after for all bovines. And that indicating that on a TMR diet, during the housing period, it reduces methane emissions by about 30%. And so we have that in the MACC. The trials during the grazing period, so when dairy cows are brought in for milking, Moore Park have been feeding animals with 3-NOP, but it leaves the system quite quickly. So during the grazing period, they're only seeing about a 7% reduction. But there is another product from Glassport Bio, which is an Irish company. It's a spin out from Galway University, and they're working with Sinead down in Athenryan Grange. And they're seeing very, very promising reductions. They're seeing about a 20% reduction during grazing, and again, a 35% reduction during the housing period. So it's uptake of that inhibitor that we have in pathway 2 or 3-NOP fed via a bolus, which would probably give you, again, a similar type of reduction.
And Gary, you were using FAPRI, to look at the three different scenarios and how they relate to the different pathways. How reliable is that modelling?
Yeah, so the FAPRI modelling is it's a partial equilibrium economic model, and essentially my colleagues Trevor Donlan and Kevin Hanrahan run that model, and that model is used. It's extremely reliable in that it is used to forecast Irish agriculture, and those forecasts feed into European forecasts of where European agriculture will go. So it feeds into the European statistics. It's also used by the EPA to project emissions into the future. So the EPA used the FAPRI projection. So FAPRI is a well-established agricultural economic model that's used not just by Ireland, but by other countries. And in general, the projections, they're not projections of agriculture are always based on the current policy and the current macroeconomic climate. Now, that's not to say those things can't change, but based on those, in the past, we've seen fairly good correlations between what FAPRI projects and what actually happens. And so within those, we have, because we have to project our emissions reduction into the future, we also have to project what our baseline emissions will be into the future. So what we did within the MACC was utilize 3 scenarios. So a business as usual scenario, which is the current economic climate. And what that showed was that by 2030, it projected we'd have about 1.69 million dairy cows and 632,000 suckler cows. Now, that's a projection of what might happen. It's not us stating that there will be 632,000 dairy cows or suckler cows or 1.69 million dairy cows. It's a projection that it's the best projection based on current government policy and current macroeconomic climate. Now, we did 2 other scenarios. One was to investigate what would happen if animal numbers were stronger or were higher than the current, and what would happen if there were policies to lower animal numbers. So we had scenario 2 where there was 1.6 million dairy cows, 500,000 suckler cows, and then scenario 3, which was 1.75 million dairy cows and 750,000 suckler cows. And the resultant change in emissions was between the lowest scenario gave you just over 21 million tons of greenhouse gases, and the highest scenario just under 23 million tons. So roughly about a 2 million ton drift in emissions, depending on whether it was the highest or lowest scenario. And the middle of the road scenario was about 22 million tons.
Do all of them factor in then a reduction in suckler numbers in the scenarios?
Yeah, that's so the general trend up to now has been a year-on-year reduction in the suckler herd. So all that FAPRI is doing is projecting that trend into the future. That trend might arrest, like it did arrest slightly in 2021. So, we're not saying the suckler herd, must go down or the dairy herd must go up. But what we are saying is that emissions, the activity data, be it dairy cows, sheep, pigs, suckler cows, poultry, mineral fertilizer, the whole of the activity within the agricultural sector cannot result in emissions greater than 22 million tons, because anything greater than that we cannot abate and reach our target.
Yeah, look, Gary, I'm just looking at some figures here in front of me, and it's looking like S1 pathway 2 is our only hope, and even at that, it's very tight. I'm looking, the target is 17.25. And that pathway 2 will deliver 17.
Exactly, and pathway 2 will deliver. You'll get there, probably by the skin of your teeth. But I mean, what you're talking about is extremely high rates of adoption with some of our measures. Just to give you a kind of a flavour of what it actually means. What you're talking about is replacing all straight urea with protected urea, and replacing over 90% of calcium ammonium nitrate with protected urea. You're talking also about reducing nitrogen to about 285,000 tons by 2030. So that's well under the acclimatized target of 300,000 tons. Yeah, you're talking about reducing the age of finishing by 3 months. You're talking about 50% of feed additives within the dairy diet during grazing, and 65% of all bovine diets during the housing period. You're talking about diversification, displacing somewhere in the region of about 138,000 livestock units. And then you're talking about things like acidification or slurry aeration in terms of manure management for 40% of dairy farms and 20% of other farms, be they pig farms or other livestock farms.
The grassland end of things as well, like extending the rotation, that has a massive impact, doesn't it, on emissions?
So if you can keep animals out of sheds, it has a number of impacts. So it'll reduce ammonia emissions, because most of our ammonia emissions occur during the housing period. It reduces manure methane. Also, because eating fresh grass is nutritionally better than eating silage or hay. you've got less methane emissions per dry matter in.
And it's positive, I suppose, that you've come up with a scenario and a pathway that we can achieve our targets by 2030. I suppose you've painted a picture there where we need a mass adoption across the country. The one thing I would say at the moment is even on social media, you would see some, I don't know, a little bit of backlash trying to argue the points from even the farming community, even other members of the community, of kind of pushing back a little bit. But from what I'm hearing from you now is, we have to just jump on board. Even some farmers are actually saying to me at the moment is, why don't we ban CAN and ban urea and just go straight to protected urea? This is the kind of conversations that are happening even at farm level. So farmers are starting to see, that they realise we have to just go at this full metal jacket.
Yeah, I mean, you could do a ban. I don't know about CAN. I'd be resistant to ban all CAN. In that we probably do need a little bit of CAN for the tillage sector. In terms of straight urea, I would certainly ban. I would certainly think that banning straight urea would possibly be an option. It is very cheap, absolutely. But in terms of ammonia emissions, we've been in breach of our ammonia ceiling since 2016. You look up in Northern Ireland, they're under severe pressure with their ammonia targets, particularly in terms of deposition of nitrogen onto vulnerable ecosystems. And really, yes, I've been seeing some things on social media about the timing of straight urea application, and absolutely, there are periods when you can put out straight urea, and volatilization will be less. But just one thing to bear in mind, we saw some of our highest emissions of ammonia from straight urea in March, when the ground was wet, and you had a bit of wind and a bit of sunshine, because the moist ground, it hydrolyzes the urea, frees up the ammonium, and then it gets volatilized off. So, protected urea, I think, is a bit of a no-brainer. Moving from nitrate-based compounds to ammonium-based compounds, back to some of our older compounds, such as 18612 or 101020. Again, there's a 40% reduction in nitrous oxide emissions compared to the nitrate emissions. Moving over from CAN to protected urea, again, is a no-brainer. It's a cheaper product. I mean, why? You look at New Zealand, they don't use any calcium ammonium nitrate. Why? Because it's very expensive.
So the agricultural efficiency measures, which reduce the carbon footprint, but only reduce absolute emissions if the volume of farm output is not increasing. Can you explain this? Because we're all about farm output. Why is this a scenario?
So the efficiency measures, we hived off the efficiency measures into their own MACC this time. And the reason being, it was causing confusion. It was causing confusion to farmers, and it was especially causing confusion to the industry. And so what we ended up doing was, so these are measures such as animal health, such as beef genetics, such as dairy genetics, etc. And what we find is that, so with these measures, they're cost negative to implement. So if you implement them, you save money, but then you're prone to what's termed the rebound effect. So as you make farming cheaper, as you make it cheaper to produce a product, you end up producing more of it. Yeah. So the example I give is the switch from petrol cars to diesel cars. It was projected that made it the efficiency of driving cheap, more greenhouse gas friendly, because for every kilometer you drove, there was less CO2 given out, right? But what happened? Transport emissions went up. Why? Because people drove more and they bought bigger cars, they bought SUVs, etc. So you ended up with higher emissions. It's exactly the same with the efficiency measures for agriculture. You make agriculture cheaper to do, and then you can, sex semen is a perfect example of that. You can end up expanding your herd quicker than you thought. And in fact, talking to some farmers who've done it. You know, in the first year of using sex semen, you can end up with too many heifers, dairy heifers. So again, that's why we hived it off. Now, if you have a sector that isn't growing, that's decreasing, say such as the beef industry, then the things like animal health and beef genetics can actually lead to absolute reductions. But in the context of dairy, where the herd is increasing, then it's probably not going to lead to absolute reductions. The one caveat I would say is that when the chaps in Moore Park looked at high EBI animals, they found that their methane emissions were actually lower than low EBI animals. So there's a portion of dairy EBI that actually goes into the absolute MACC because it leads to an absolute reduction, but not all of it.
I see on the MACC there, you have one of the bars is for diversification, Gary.
Yeah.
What's in that? And
Okay.
the good thing on it as well is it's actually saving the farmer money, but look at it. It's below the line.
Yeah, it's below the line, and that depends on the measure, of course.
Yeah.
So there's 4 measures in there. So there's a movement to organics, which we assume would result in about a 12% reduction in stocking rate. Now, that could be anything from 0, because some farmers might already be at organic stocking densities, or it could be all the way up to maybe a 30-40% reduction in stocking rate. So we hit it at about 12%. So that's one of the measures. One of the other measures is afforestation, because the soils that forestry can now go on is narrowing up. So we project there might be some displacement there. The big displacer would be growing feedstock, grass feedstock for biomethane. So we have a biomethane target of 5.7 terawatt hours to reach by 2030, which is extraordinarily ambitious. It will require somewhere in the region about 250 anaerobic digesters. It'll require somewhere in the region at 10 tons of grass per hectare, it would require 120,000 hectares. At about 8 tons, somewhere in the region of 135 to 140,000 hectares. So, you know, that could be a very big displacer of animals, and particularly if the industry is offering good prices for the silage. In that case, so from all of these, and then there's also the increase in tillage. So the government has a targeted increase in tillage that may or may not displace some animals. But overall, what we project is somewhere in the region of 138,000 livestock units being displaced, and that's going to be divided up between sheep and cattle.
Huge potential for lots of land use changes, which is great. The one thing when you're here, because I know you're the man to ask, peat soils, can you bust this myth for us? A lot of farmers, I suppose, are worried about the peat soils being re-wet. Can you explain that, what actually happens when you talk about re-wetting peat soils?
Yeah, so there's two bits there. First of all, my colleagues, Pat Toohey, Owen Fenton, Conor Bracken and Lillian O'Sullivan have come out with a paper which has shown that, in fact, there's less of our soils that have been drained, or our peat soils drained, than we thought. So it was assumed there was about 340,000 hectares of peat soil, of grassland on peat soils that was drained for agricultural use. Looks like that's closer to somewhere between about 100 and 120,000 hectares. So that's the first thing. So there's less land drained than we thought. You know, even with that land, if you want to raise the water table, blocking the drains probably won't bring the water table all the way back to the surface. It might come up near the surface at the winter time, then drain down a little bit in the summertime. And we see that on a lot of the peat sites we've gone to that have blocked drains, and they are still grazed in the summertime. So they're fields that are generally used for height of summer grazing, really, you know. So they can still be utilised even if the drains are blocked up.
Yeah. Look, Gary, I know you're very busy, so I really want to thank you for taking your time out, but especially want to thank you because you've saved our listeners reading that 350-page document. But if they want to read it and look for more details, we can get it on the Teagasc website, and I'm sure.
On the Teagasc website. And there's also a summary document that's 15 pages long and a bit more digestible on the website as well.
Lovely. Really appreciate you joining us on the show, Gary. Thanks a million. Keep up the good work.
Thanks, Gary.
No problem. Thanks a lot. Thanks.
That's it for this episode of the Teagasc Environment Edge podcast. Thanks to Teagasc researcher Professor Gary Lanigan for joining us on the show.
Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen to Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. And for more information, go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm Cathal Summers.
And I'm Deirdre Glenn.
Join us next time for the Teagasc Environment Edge podcast, signpost to farm sustainability.